Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Noah Arnow, Rabbi Noah Arnow, however you know me by. And I'm thrilled to be here with all of you this evening. Want to first introduce my father, David Arnow. David is a psychologist by training and the author of a good stack of books now, the author of Creating Lively Passover Seders, a source book of engaging tales, texts, and activities. He's also the co-editor of My People's Passover Haggadah in 2 volumes. He is the co-author of Leadership in the Bible, a practical guide for today with Paul Ohana. And he is now the author of the just published Choosing Hope, the Heritage of Judaism, published by the Jewish Publication Society. If you have a copy with you and you want to hold it up so everybody can see, that's great. You don't have to though. He's a wonderful father, a wonderful husband, a wonderful grandfather, and also somebody who has never been despondent, never despaired, at least in my experience, and has always been somebody who has been a source of hope for me, and has now thought about hope and what hope is more than just about anybody that I know. So I'm just thrilled to be with him, and I'm so proud of him tonight and really every day. And we are also, I'm so glad also to be here with Sarah Hurwitz. Sarah served as the head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama and as a senior speechwriter for President Obama. And she is the author of Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism After Finally Choosing to Look There. A terrific book, a great read. You should all buy it as well. I want to just put in the chat, here we go, links to buy both of the books, whether from your local bookseller or directly from the publisher. Also for my dad's book, there is a code for a discount, which is running out soon. So buy your book with the discount, a 40% discount from JPS in the next day or so. I think it expires soon. I want to ask people just to use the chat for a moment. And if you want to just put in your name and where you're from, it'll be nice for people to see that. So take 1 minute and just put in where you are sitting right now in the chat. You can see a sample. And it's just neat to see people's names and see where everybody is. And the other thing, once we put those in, you can take a look. It's great to see so many friends, familiar faces. I also would like people to put into the chat for just a second how you would define hope. What does hope mean? So write the way you define hope into the chat, if you would be so kind. How do you define hope? Hope is my help in living, uplifting. Hard to define it this week. I understand that. Positive attitude and actions, optimism, realistic optimism, faith in a positive outcome, staying connected to the eternal source, the ability to be positive in the face of hard times, the opposite of fear, motivation for action. These are great things. Always believing that it can always get better when things are hard, the courage to pursue a vision despite the realities that argue against the vision. So many great things here. But I want to turn things over to my dad and to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Noah. It is an incredible pleasure and an honor to be here tonight to do the book launch event for this wonderful book. This book, I hope you all have it. If you do not, please order it immediately. Those of you who've had the pleasure of reading it know that it is beautiful, it is brilliant, it is deeply researched, it is moving. is hopeful, and it is very, very important. I have already quoted from this book in an event, and I'm confident that everyone here will be doing that to everyone they know. So please, it's just a wonderful book. And so, David, I'm thrilled to be with you. And I actually just want to start out tonight by asking, we asked everyone else, how do they understand hope? How do you understand hope?
So I want to first begin just by mentioning the title of a book by a psychologist who did a tremendous amount of research on the psychology of hope. The book is called The Psychology of Hope, You Can Get There From Here. This concept of getting there from here makes me want to, first of all, thank many, many people, because I would not have gotten from there to here, from this book being an idea to being something that some of you have actually read. and you're gathered to further sort of push along. So first, thanks to beloved Maddie, my wife for almost 46 years, who's, I don't know, she's probably heard everything that's in this book so many times that it's painful for her and less interesting to her than maybe to people for the first time. But she is an enormous source of hope to me, and strength and encouragement. Noah, thank you for reading and reviewing many, many drafts over the years, and for doing this tonight. My son, Adam, constant source of encouragement, a big sustainer of hope for me. My family, friends, you have all, teachers, I see teachers of mine from a long time ago. You've all helped me get to this point. And so many, many thanks. And thanks to Sarah, who is my special partner in hope for this evening, who has not only written great speeches for Michelle Obama, but as Noah said, has written a great book that can speak to lots of people about Judaism in a voice that they need to hear. I'll just put it that way. Okay, so now what is hope? Many, many good statements about it. I'll say a couple of other things. So one of the people whose work really influenced me tremendously is Gabriel Marcel. He's a French philosopher, playwright, and he wrote in 1942 a very, very powerful essay on hope. One of the most important philosophical treatments of hope, I think, that certainly that I've encountered. And the date that he wrote this, in 1942, very, very significant. This was in the middle of the Nazi occupation of France. He was living in Lyon at the time. And I point this out especially because it's not unusual that in times of great difficulty, times of trial, people turn to hope, think about it, and find it. And Marcel defined hope as the response to the trial. And he said that there can be no hope except when the possibility or the temptation to despair exists. And hope is the act by which that temptation is victoriously overcome. So this is telling us that hope is the furthest thing from Pollyannism. Oh, I think everything will come out okay. Or certain types of optimism, which are kind of more like making a speech, which says, based on my experience on this circumstances, I think this will come out well. Pollyannism, optimism, and even pessimism really don't require anything of you. Hope demands everything from you. So very important to underscore the idea that hope is acting to bring about a particular future. Hope is acting to find the way through the trial. So that's from the philosophical point of view. From Snyder's point of view, he wrote about hope as requiring the ability to articulate a goal. Can't be fuzzy, can't be just like I want, better. you got to be able to see it. It has to be sharply seen. And then it requires two things: willpower, the conviction that you can stick with something and that your actions make a difference. And that in addition to that, he calls way power. So it's willpower plus way power. Way power is the ability to generate different strategies to reach the goal. Because we all know that if you're reaching for anything that is of much value or much worth at all, you're not going to get it right away. It's going to take time, and it's going to take struggle, and it's going to take readjusting your strategies to get there. So again, he's emphasizing the active nature of hope. And Sarah Snyder, he developed the hope scale, and his scale has been used more than any other instrument to measure hope. And just to give you a couple of ideas of what he's measuring. In uncertain times, that is the optimism scale, which I won't go into right now. It's very different. Here's Snyder. I can think of many ways to get out of a jam. I energetically pursue my goals. There are lots of ways around any problem. No, I don't need to go on, but you get the sense that hope is really active and requiring you to not sit there and wait, but to sort of go out and make things happen. So I think that's how I think about it. It's not so different than what many of you have put out there in the chat as well.
That is, I mean, just the level of thought and nuance there. It's fascinating and really important. I mean, my next question, I think it's going to seem like an obvious question, but I actually don't think it is, which is, why is hope important?
So from a very practical point of view, Snyder and his colleagues and his students and his successors have found that people who score high on hope do better in a lot of things in life. They have better success at jobs. They perform better in sports. They cope with aging better. And they cope with illness and all of the stresses and strains that go along with that. They can even keep their hand in ice water. People who have high levels of hope, they can keep their hand in ice water for longer, significantly longer than people who have lower levels of hope. So this is pain. It's getting through pain, and it's enduring pain. So that's on a very practical level. But I think we all know that on some very different level, we can't live without hope. And there's something that Elie Wiesel wrote about this. He said, the death of hope is the death of all generous impulses in me. It is the end of all possibility, options, inquiries, renewals of redemption. Where, under which sky would we be if we were deserted by hope?
That's quite extraordinary. So we've been talking about hope in general. I want to now kind of focus in on the topic of your book, which is hope in Judaism. We are living in, I think it's fair to say, challenging times. We have a COVID-19, we have a just horrific and heartbreaking situation in the Ukraine right now. We have climate change, we have our political climate. What elements of Judaism do you find particularly sustaining of hope amidst all of these trials?
So some of them are kind of general and some are very personal. Let me start with the general ones. The holidays, we have this cycle of holidays. And the thing about them is that they really speak in a different voice, at least to me, depending on what's going on. And this, for example, lighting the Hanukkah menorah during this very dark COVID time said to me that, first of all, it said, we do this at the darkest time of the year. There's barely any moon and it's the shortest days. And it says to me that even when there's no light, we can do something to make light, and we can keep at it long enough so that light in some way overcomes darkness and hope overcomes despair. I can't say that I always thought about Hanukkah in that way, but I thought about it much more in these couple of years. Tonight is the beginning of the month that the holiday of Purim falls in. It's a complicated holiday. It's about a megalomaniac, for those of you who may not be so familiar, a megalomaniac advisor to the king who decides that he's going to wipe out all of the Jews in Persia. And he takes a fancy to a very beautiful girl, a Jewish girl named Esther, and she becomes queen. She has to save the Jewish population, and she has to figure out how to do this. And God is not in the book of Esther. So this is all on us, and it was actually all on her. And there's a verse in the scroll of Esther that really it speaks to me, especially this year. And who knows, this is Esther's uncle saying this to her right before he gives her the charge to go figure out how to save us. So he says, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's right now, that's Zelensky. And I also think, I feel very deeply that that's all of us. We have all come to this place to do something, to save people, to save the world, to do our little part to make it better. And so, I've read this in Megillah many, many times. As thinking about it, the holiday coming up, that line just really sort of bowled me over. And then a month from now, or a month from 6 weeks from now, we're going to be celebrating Passover. And here too, I mean, I actually turned, my 70th birthday was on Passover of the first lockdown.
Oh.
Yeah. And, we had a big Passover Zoom Seder, but we were in captivity. And Marcel speaks about the trial as captivity, as yearning to kind of get out and be free, but you're a captive. I never experienced really the story of the Exodus in this way, where my own personal freedom was limited. And let me tell you, obviously it's not limited like freedom has been limited for some people, but I felt it in a different way. And so this great sort of saga of hope, this journey from slavery to freedom, I read that in a different way and experienced it in a very different way in the lockdown of COVID. And now we're kind of getting out. We're getting out of that captivity. And our Seders, I think, will start to be a little bit more normal. A couple of other things here. Even if we were locked in and required to sort of stay home for a long time, there were lots of Tikkun Olam activities that people engaged in all kinds of ways. So the obligation and the responsibility to participate in ways of repairing this world, there's a lot of hope there. We know it's a big job to do, but it's when your shoulder's at the wheel, I think you feel a sense of motion, even if it's slow motion toward that better future. There's something I came across in the research for this book that very, very much struck me. Hasidic teaching that says, before you start praying in the morning, you should say this: it's my responsibility to repair the world, and no one else can do it for me. Because there are things that each and every person must fix, and it's for that purpose that they were brought into this world. And there is no one aside from that person who can fix those particular things. So I feel like, Tikkun Olam gets you off the sidelines and puts you in the game in some way. And that's a much better place to be in terms of hope. The last thing I'll say about this is that since 2010, I have been attending the morning minyan, something I never experienced or expected I would be doing, except for the period of saying Kaddish for my parents. but the experience really spoke to me. And so I continued. And during COVID, and even now, that morning minion is on Zoom. And so I actually do it exactly where I am now. With the background that you see now, that's where I am in the morning. And that is like, it's like a spiritual exercise to start off the morning. It's like going to the spiritual gym. And it's sharing this immersion in texts. We may interpret these texts in very different ways, but these are the texts that have sustained our people for a long, long time. And many of them are about hope. There's a chapter in the book about the morning liturgy, which I won't go into now, but covenant and hope in the morning liturgy is there. So Marcel also says that hope is weak unless it is forged in the department of the us. He says, the department of the us, which is fellowship, he says. So that's here, that's us tonight, but that's the morning minion every morning in a quiet way. So those are some of the amazing things that from Judaism that have sustained me through this time and will continue to.
Beautiful. Wow.
So Sarah, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So what role did hope play for you in your work with the Obamas and in your kind of political life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, every political campaign, every presidential administration is an act of hope, right? Like you don't get up in the morning for that unless you truly have this, I loved it. What would you say? Like it's a way, right? That there's an action here. I think a lot about the campaign of Barack Obama in 2008. When he started out, he was polling in the single digits, right? No one thought that this man could possibly become president, except for the people who did, right? Who had that hope, who had that belief. And, I think a lot about actually election night, 2008. There's a story that his election night speech is one of my favorite Obama speeches. And, I remember when we were working on it together, the speechwriting team, the ending of that speech talks about a woman named Ann Nixon Cooper, who was 106 years old. And she was born before women could vote. She was born when African Americans could not vote, and she's an African American woman. And we talked about all the things she'd seen in her life. Women getting the ballot, overcoming a Great Depression, winning a great war, the Civil Rights Movement, a man on the moon, science, all of this stuff. We talked about how in this year, in this election, she touched her finger to a screen because she believes America could change. Right? This woman's life has been kind of one act of hope after another, culminating in this moment when she helped elect the first African-American president of the United States. So I think, the role of hope, it played, it's our campaign slogan and just a key part of both the campaign and working in the White House. So thank you for the question.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you, why did you write a book about Judaism and hope? What led you to decide, okay, this is what I need to expend the considerable amount of energy and effort that it takes to write a book?
Right. So in some ways, I guess some of the early seeds were planted a long time ago. And my mother was giving birth to my brother Josh, and I was 7 at the time, and there were some very serious complications that took place, and it did not look like my mother was going to pull through. I didn't know this at the time. I only found this out some years later. But my father had a very powerful prayer experience, and my mother wound up pulling through. It wasn't necessarily, I mean, as I think about it now, for sure, I don't connect the actual prayers to the outcome. I think there are lots of husbands that are praying for the same outcome and they don't get it, and they pray with the same intensity. But as a result of this, my father's life changed dramatically. he had been playing golf on Shabbat and belonged to the country club. And they left the country club, and he started going to synagogue regularly. The house started filling up with Jewish books, many published by the Jewish Publication Society. And I had a very early, so I probably learned about all of this a few years after the fact, but the idea of hope and Judaism were like kind of welded together in a very powerful way for me. And maybe as a result of that, I became a psychologist. And, there, hope is either in the background or the foreground all the time. And usually in the course of therapy, there'll be a kind of like a crisis of hope, where the question will be, is there any hope? Client says that I can really change and get to where I want to be. And if you can work that out, often therapy will continue. And if you can't, lots of people drop out because of a sense that there just is no hope. So fast forward some years, and I was doing a lot of fundraising for the New Israel Fund. And I would talk to people about our efforts to strengthen democracy in Israel. This was in the 80s, when things were actually a lot simpler in Israel. And people would say, "Oh, what you're doing is it's great, but that place is hopeless." And I was like shocked by this encounter of hopelessness among Jews, because I felt like Judaism and hope, they go together. Hatikva, right? Right. So I would try to do some persuading, but I realized that no, hope is not something in any people that you can take for granted. So I got curious about how do Jews find it? Where do we find this? Because it could be like running out. So I decided I got to do some work on that. Yeah. So those are some of the factors.
You did some amazing work on that. Actually, one of the many parts of the book I loved was the various stories of different organizations, people, leaders in Israel working to promote hope and understanding and sow peace. So it was, beautiful. What I'm actually kind of wondering is, like, what was the most surprising thing that you learned when you were writing Choosing Hope?
So,
oh, you know what? Actually, well, go ahead. I had a different question, but yeah, answer that first, and I'll go back.
So, there are, many surprises. But I'll tell you one, and then if there's time, maybe I'll tell you another. Okay. So this one has to do with this theme of Tikkun Olam, which we've already spoken about. But so the question is, where does this concept come from? And it is well known that in rabbinic literature, the first place it appears is in the Mishnah, a law code about 1800 years old. And there, the context is, you got some laws of divorce on the books that have some loopholes that enable nasty husbands to really put their wives in a situation where they could be unable to go back to them, the nasty husband, and unable to marry anybody else. So putting the wife in a very dark and hopeless place. And so these laws were amended to close these loopholes. I don't want to go into the technicalities. You can read about them in the book if you're interested, but the loopholes are closed. And there's an explanation for why why are we doing this? And there's an answer given, which is relatively unusual in the Mishnah. The answer is mipnei tikkun ha'olam, for the sake of tikkun ha'olam. Now, what the rabbis who said this exactly meant by that, there's dispute. I do believe that it means to improve the world, not just to maintain the status quo, or to sort of maintain order is another way it's understood. And so that's all known. So what was the big surprise? The surprise was if I looked further. So why did they choose this phraseology? Why tikkun olam? So that's what was amazing to me. So the root for tikkun or taf kuf nun appears only in one book in the Bible. It appears 3 times in that book. This is in the book of Ecclesiastes. Extremely pessimistic book.
Yeah.
And twice in that book, the context is the crooked cannot be made straight. Okay? Can't fix anything. That goes right along with Ecclesiastes. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing to do. Everything is futile. The word olam, which in tikkun olam means world, occurs many times in the Bible, but it doesn't mean world except in one possible place in the Bible. In the rest of the Bible, it means eternity. It has to do with time going on forever. But olam in one verse in Ecclesiastes seems to mean world. So you have these 2 words in this very dark, pessimistic book. And what the rabbis do, and the rabbis, if I know this, they knew this. They were so sensitive to the language of the Bible. And when they wanted to subvert it, they knew how to do that. And I believe that they wanted to subvert the pessimism of Ecclesiastes, which is so pessimistic that many of these same sages argued that it shouldn't even be included in the canon. So they subverted the terminology by making it an expression of straightening out what's crooked, fixing what needs to be fixed, closing loopholes that allow women to be exploited. Yeah. That was amazing to me. That was, and there's a more complicated argument for this in the book, but I was quite, I felt like I discovered something which was, I love that.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah. Beautiful.
So I don't know if we have time for one other thing that was surprising. Maybe I'll try. Okay.
I think so. Sure.
All right. So one of the great historians of recent times, no longer with us, Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, wrote an essay about hope in Judaism, where he lamented the fact that there was hardly anything written about this. And he said that we have all the texts, we have all we need, we just have to read them in a different way. So when I started looking at some of these familiar texts, narrative stories, the way that they, like hope, shine through, if you just sort of shift the lens a little bit, was amazing to me. And so here's an example of that. This is the story of the binding of Isaac, usually taught to be a story of faith, of sometimes blind, even dangerous faith, but faith, not usually a story of hope. But here, let's look at Marcel and his idea of the trial. So how does the story begin? And God tested Abraham. So right away, we're in the mode of the trial. Marcel says hope is, you can't see the future, but you act as if you can see the future. So here we have some things that Abraham says. Abraham says very little in this whole story, but what does he say? He says, God will see to the sheep. That's what he's prophesying in a way. A midrash actually says he's prophesying what he wants to be. And then he says to the people who've come with him on the journey, you stay here. Isaac and I will go up the mountain. We will bow down and pray, and we will come back. Okay, so this is hope speaking. This is his hope shining through and seeing the outcome that he hopes will be. Hope thrives in, and in a certain sense can only exist when there's an openness about the future, when there's a little bit of a question mark. So there's a question mark that has been very obvious to interpreters, Jewish commentators on a particular verse. Right in the beginning of the story, where God says, you take him and raise him up there. for an offering. The Hebrew is v'ha'alehu sham la'olah. So usually it's has a meaning that we all understand. Go take him up there, sacrifice him. Here's what the Midrash says, and many other commentators ask this question too. They say, I don't know whether this means to bring him up as an actual burnt offering or to raise him up to the top of the altar in place of a burnt offering to the place where the burnt offering would be performed. So and the language supports either reading. So, there's ambiguity in there. And when there's ambiguity, there's room to try to shape the outcome that you want. Then Marcel also says, to have hope and to act in hope means you have to be flexible. He says you have to be like a skier. You can't freeze up or you'll just be knocked, backwards. You have to be kind of keep in motion. And Abraham is constantly in motion, constantly moving forward. And it's in that movement where new possibilities are born. And in this case, it's the possibility of realizing the hope that Isaac is going to get out of this situation. And then he says one more thing, Marcel, that hope in a deep sense means remaining true to yourself through this trial to the extent that you possibly can. And as I said, Abraham says hardly anything. We've looked at the two things that he says. He says 3 other words, the same word 3 times. At the beginning of the story, he says, Hineni, here I am. In the middle of the story, Isaac says, where's the sheep? He says, Dad, I have a question. Hineni. And then the angel of God comes at the end and says, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham says, Hineni. So here you have this is a solid person who is himself in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. Now, how this kind of lays out so nicely, when you look at it, you just shift the lens a little bit. That's amazing to me. And there are many, many other stories that work that way. So Yerushalmi was right. The stories are there. We have to shift our way of looking at them. So hope is what shines out.
Shift in perspective. I love it. So, I want to just read just a small passage from Choosing Hope. You're right. As images of God, we have virtually unlimited creativity and power. We occupy the stage of history with God as our audience. We have the capacity to fulfill our hopes. God may offer us inspiration, may cheer us on, may hope in us even when we despair, but God will not bail us out or prevent despair from triumphing over hope. Only we can do that. In the Bible and the prayer book, human beings hope for God's strong hand and outstretched arm to redeem Israel and the world. From a modern Jewish theological stance, God hopes to see us do the same thing. Now, obviously, we're talking about God here, and I'd like you to expand a little bit on what kind of God you have in mind here. And if God does not fulfill our hopes, then what role does God have in relation to our hopes?
Very good question also. So let me start with the idea of our being created in the image of God and what that means, because there is one of the big sort of points of contact between God and our hopes. So God is the ultimate creator, and in God's image, we have these unbelievably powerful creative capacities, which means that we can use them to fulfill our hopes. So we get this super creativity from this very sort of bedrock belief that we're created in the image of God. God says, to Moses, Moses says, "What's your name?" God says, "I will be what I will be." So we can be what we can be. And that means that the future is open for God. The future is open for us. And we have the power to create hope where none exists. Elie Wiesel says that, we created in the image of God have the power to create hope where none exists. So that's kind of one point of contact between God and hope. Another one is that going back, it sounds like it's a new idea, but it's not. The idea that God left the world in a state of incompleteness, expecting us to kind of work in some way with God together in some kind of way to fix what was not finished. You find these things expressed in the Talmud, and you find Maimonides and the modern disciples of Maimonides, Soloveitchik, David Hartman, Yitz Greenberg, many others, underscoring this notion of partnership between us and God. And here's what Soloveitchik says about this. He says, when human beings, the crowning glory of the cosmos, approach the world, we find our task at hand, the task of creation. We must stand guard over the pure, clear existence, repair the defects in the cosmos, and replenish the privation in being. We, the creatures, are commanded to become the partner with the Creator in the renewal of the cosmos, complete and ultimate creation. This is the deepest desire of the Jewish people, the realization of all its hopes. So that's point 2 of contact between hope and God and us. The third for me is prayer. So prayer is not for me the place where, you know, I'm expecting to, I don't know, put down a chip somewhere and, you know, or buy the ticket and the lottery is going to come my way. Right. It's a place where I share very intimate hopes in a kind of very private little dialogue with some being. It feels to me like some being. It's not like just a conversation in my head, totally. And the question there is, in this dialogue about hope, is, are those hopes really worthy? Are those hopes really good for me or for anybody else? Because we can hope for a lot of things and be seduced by a lot of glittering hopes that really, can lead us down the wrong path. So it's a place to really, prayer is a place to weigh out and assess and get some little inklings of feedback. Like, yes, it's a good hope. Pursue it. I sometimes get that inkling. And that's very empowering. So there's a third point of close contact between hope and God and through prayer. And I have to say here too, Heschel speaks a lot about hope and prayer, and so does Marcel. Marcel says prayer is the zone of hope.
Yeah, beautiful. I just want to say now, if folks in the audience, if you have any questions for David, you can just type them into the chat right now, or just between now and the end. And we will, if we have time, we will take some audience questions.
But Sarah, I have a question for you.
Okay.
I have another question for you.
Okay.
But I have to find, I want to quote something from your book. Okay. So you say something about hope in your book. You say, each of us has the power to vote with our voices and our feet for the kind of Judaism we wish to experience. But that requires us to show up to classes, services, and gatherings of all kinds, and to do some learning, questioning, and wrestling. To undertake this effort, we must first decide that there's something worth showing up for, something in which we are willing to invest our time, trust, and hope. So I write about Judaism as a source of hope. You're writing about us needing to invest hope in Judaism. Could you please expand?
So I completely agree with you that Judaism is a great source of hope, but I will also say that if, like me 10 years ago, you are an average American Jew, your main points of contact with Judaism are 2 fairly long, maybe not super exciting high holy day services and a Seder that might be nice, but you know, I don't think that the Jew who has those 3 points of contact with Judaism walks away thinking, wow, Judaism really has wisdom that's going to transform my life. This is really where I am going to find meaning and connection and spirituality. I think we often walk away feeling kind of both bored and relieved. It's like, oh, okay, check the box, saw some friends, whew, now I can go back to just my life. And, that was me for most of my life. And, I randomly wound up taking an Intro to Judaism class through some bizarre set of circumstances at the age of 36. And I thought, where has this been my whole life? There is 4,000 years of crowdsourced wisdom from millions of people, wise, brilliant people, about what it means to be human, how to be a good person, how to lead a worthy life, how to find deep spiritual connection. And I thought, I'm going to go learn about this tradition. This is great. I'm going to read all the books. Wow, it was very hard. I will be honest. I did find lots of sort of nuts and bolts how-to books, which are great for how to light the Shabbat candles, how to do X, Y, and Z. But I was really curious about the why to. And, if you want the why to of Judaism, you're making one heck of a commitment to wade through some dense texts. And, I was motivated to spend thousands of hours. I don't think a lot of folks are, understandably, because people have families and jobs and things going on. And, for me, I really, I feel like we have to convince Jews that there is something worth hoping for in Judaism. So I really set out to write a book sharing what I thought was the most radical, subversive, transformational, life-changing, life-affirming wisdom that Judaism has to offer. And I wanted to do it in a way that, yes, covers the basics, teaches Judaism, but that provides a fresh perspective that actually doesn't just say, here is the Torah, here is the Talmud. It's like, no, let's describe the entire process and project of Judaism as this evolving 2,500, thousands-year-old conversation where we're constantly reinterpreting, reimagining, re-understanding. I think very few Jews, first of all, most Jews never heard of the Talmud. Even the Torah, I think we're getting, I don't know, but it's a little hard to know if folks actually know what that is. And I want to show people there's something worth hoping for in this. So that was the goal of my book. Right. We'll see.
Yeah. I just have to say, super important to have. I talked about fresh readings of old texts, familiar texts. This is like fresh voices who have discovered on their own the richness.
Yeah, there is much richness to be discovered. So, this is my last question for you before we get to audience Q&A is, reading your book, pretty obviously, I thought about Viktor Frankl, and, I'm kind of curious for you about, how does his work relate to hope?
Right. So Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, which is a very, very powerful book, he writes about hope quite a bit from different points of view. He tells one story, which extremely moving story. This is in the early 1945, and he's in a camp, and somebody stole some potatoes from the kitchen. A Jewish person stole some potatoes from the kitchen, and so the commandant of the camp said, "Until you point out, Jews, who this person is, you're going to be fasting for the day, 24 hours of fast." And these people were like eating nothing anyway. So the fasting was not an easy thing. They decided to fast rather than turn over the person. So now we have 2,500 people fasting. And there was a Jewish kind of like warden of a particular barracks. And he was talking to Viktor Frankl, who was a young psychiatrist at the time, and said, more people are committing suicide now. And he said, this is the only reason that this is happening now is because people are hopeless. And he said to Viktor Frankl, you have to do something about this. So Frankl gives a talk to the people in the barracks. And he actually says that in the middle of the talk, the lights, not that there were a lot of lights, but whatever light there was, it went out. And he says, he's speaking very personally, he says, I don't think that my chances are more than 1 in 20 of getting out of here alive. but he tells them that he's not giving up on hope anyway. And he tells them he says everybody has to imagine that there's somebody that they love, maybe somebody alive, maybe somebody not, maybe God, looking down on them. And he says, I said that he tells them, someone looks down on each of us in difficult hours, a friend, a wife, somebody alive or dead or God, and he would not expect us to disappoint him. He would hope to find us suffering proudly, not miserably, knowing how to die.
Mm.
So this kind of tells us something very important about hope, that it's connected to finding meaning, but also the targets of hope really change depending on the circumstances that you're in. In the situation that Frankel was in there, the issue was not necessarily, hoping to get out. I mean, you could hope for that, but maybe that wasn't going to happen. But you could still hope that you would conduct yourself with a certain degree of yourself, being yourself to the end, through the end, with whatever dignity you could preserve for yourself. So in terminal illness, the question is not, are you somehow, and there's much research and writing about this too, hope in cases of terminal illness. It isn't like, how do you hold on to this miraculous kind of dream that you're going to pull through? You may not, and confronting that is part of the process. But living in hope that you can go through the process of dying in the best way that you can, and be your best self, treating yourself as best you can, treating others as best you can, that's what you hope for then. So hope is playing a role all through the very end. It may not be the hope that you start off with in the beginning of a journey, but it's hope nonetheless at the very end of the journey still.
Beautiful.
I got to say one thing. I don't want to be heavy, totally heavy here, but Frankel said some other things too. He said, in order for people to sustain hope in this situation, they have to laugh. And he made a deal with some of his comrades there that they would tell each other like a joke every day about something that, like they would envision some being out of the camps, and yet some experience in the camps, like invading their life in some way. So one man, he said, they're telling a joke a day to each other. So one man's joke is this. He's dreaming, the joke is, I am at a very fancy dinner party, and I am being served some soup out of a beautiful tureen. And I say to the person who's serving the soup, could you please just be sure to serve that from the bottom of the tureen, please? Because in the camps, that's the only place that there was anything solid in the soup.
Oh,
So they laughed about that. They laughed about that. And so the last chapter in the book is called The Currency of Hope. And there's Archibald, the theologian Cox said, hope is, humor is hope's last refuge, last weapon. So yeah, so gotta find our ways of laughing about whatever's going on. There was just a very short little joke. A great Talmud scholar, one of the great contemporary Talmud scholars, Aryeh Kaplan, was asked if the Talmud had any good jokes, and he said yes, but they're all old.
This is something we're pretty good with the humor. It is a coping strategy we've developed over many, many years with good reason. So it looks like we do have some audience questions.
Yeah, we have some great questions. I want to start with just a definitional question. What's the difference between hope and optimism?
Okay, so I mentioned before that optimism really is not connected necessarily to action. And I'm looking for this optimism scale, actually. Okay. So optimism is kind of a forecast that, I think it will work out okay. Based on my previous experience or the experience of others, I think the outcome will be X, Y, and Z, and it will be favorable. And Marcel says that this is basically optimists are making speeches. And you contrast that to Abraham, who's not really saying a lot. All of his hope is expressed in action. So that's one way of thinking about it. I'll give you, from this optimism skill, there's been a lot of research on optimism. And remember I told you at the very beginning, I said that people who have high levels of hope can keep their hand in ice water for a longer time than people who have low levels of hope. There's no such correlation with optimism. Optimism has no influence on how long you keep your hand in ice water. But here's a couple of the optimism questions. Overall, I expect more good things to happen to me than bad. In uncertain times, I usually expect the best. Let's see. And this is sort of an anti-optimism. If something can go wrong for me, it will. So you see that there's nothing about human action here, nothing about human agency. So it's really it's a much more passive thing. Although I have to say, there's certain people who use the word optimism and they mean hope. And so it's not like you should, and I would never use that word, no. But some people, they mean hope, but they just feel comfortable. They don't, hope is not a word for them. Optimism is a word for them, so they use it.
Another question is, do you have to believe in God to have hope?
So, always there's the answer to that kind of question is, what kind of God are we talking about here? But there's, Mordecai Kaplan did not believe in the sort of ideological founder of the Reconstructionist movement, did not believe in supernatural God. But he said that, God is the power in people that works for freedom. He might have said, God is the power in people that works for hope. And there's a Ernest Bloch, who's a Jewish Marxist philosopher who wrote a 3-volume, extremely dense work called The Principles of Hope. He was a total atheist. There are secular philosophies of hope. Rorty has a social hope that is very similar to, it's as if you're acting on the idea that you have responsibility for other people, and the wider that you can extend that sort of ambit of responsibility, that's social hope growing. Also, he was a very famous atheist. So the answer to that is no.
There have been a couple of questions about, what happens when your hopes don't work out? And kind of related, can hope ever be counterproductive?
Right. So about hopes being counterproductive. So there's a whole literature on false hope. And Snyder has an article about false hope. And he basically says that for him, he says that, how would you evaluate somebody's false hope? You would say that there's a child who wants to become a ballerina or an ice skater, be in the Olympics. You'd say, well, what are the chances, or a baseball player, what's the chances of that happening? Chances of that are very close to zero. Not zero, but very close to zero. But if everybody accepted that as false hope, we would have no such people ice skating or ballerinas or baseball players. So he says, I would be very cautious before labeling something a false hope. And he actually did research. He was doing research with graduate students all the time. And he had these puzzles that he would give people to solve. And there were certain puzzles that nobody could solve for over many, many years. And finally, he got a group of people together. He separated the high hope and the low hope people. And he gave the high hope people and the low hope people a lot of time, much more time, to work on these impossible puzzles. And some of the high hope people solved the puzzles. So, he says from this, the way that human knowledge advances is through these kind of like leaps and bounds. Things that seemed impossible, all of a sudden there's a breakthrough, and what seemed impossible or insoluble, we now can solve. So he was very, very reluctant to label things as false hope. Now, what about, look, but there's the joke also, this one is told about the optimist. What's the optimist jumps off the Empire State Building halfway down and says, "So far, so good." So, obviously, anything taken to an extreme could be not helpful. But what if your hopes don't come true? There's a verse in the book of Proverbs that says, hope deferred sickens the heart, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So for sure, this idea of unfulfilled hope has been around for a long time. Those proverbs are not new. One question, then the standard explanation for that is, oh, the person's hoping for the wrong thing. He's hoping for material, wealth and all this kind of stuff. That stuff you never get enough of, so you can never be fulfilled. But no, the fact is that there's certain things that don't work out. And, as I said before, hope involves the ability to generate new strategies. And there are always new strategies. And hope, as I said, also, it flourishes in the department of the us. So before determining that it's not working out, maybe the department of the us needs to be enlarged and have some new voices in it. Sometimes there are people who can see a little bit of light where we don't. And sometimes, like a lot of people on the team are giving up, and there's one person who just on that day is not. So sometimes who's in the department of us is really important to consider. But hope can be disappointed. There's a Bloch, the atheist Marxist, has an essay, "Can Hope Be Disappointed?" And his answer is yes, it can be disappointed. And Marcel said the same, hope can only exist where the possibility of the temptation of despair exists. So it's possible. And there's one more thing here, there's the question of time, because there are things that in our lifetime, things that I've worked on, I'm not going to see the fruits of. And I know some people here are working for great things in the Middle East, great, really trying to solve some big problems, which some of them are younger than I. So maybe you'll see it, but maybe not. So what this has to do is with kind of making sure that the next generation is filled with the hope that you have to continue the work, even if it's going to be generations in the efforts. The big things are going to take a long time, and so we really do need to see ourselves as transmitters of hope, not necessarily as the people who take the ball over the finish lines ourselves.
Wow. Well, I think now everyone here, you all have proof of how extraordinary David's thoughts are on the topic of hope and Judaism and hope. This has given you just a small taste of what is waiting for you in this book if you have not read it. So please get it, order it. And now I just want to turn it over to David just for some final thoughts and takeaways.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, there's a couple of things of all the things that I, talked about and written about in this book. There's a few things that I just want to like take the yellow highlighter to here. So the first one is that hope needs to be taken seriously. It's people, oh, hope, he's full of hope, or hope now, you're talking about hope now? Yeah, I'm talking about hope now, because now is when we need it. So it requires vision, it requires work, and it is, even when it's hard, and especially when it's hard, it's time for hope and the work of hope to go on. In times of trial, hope leads us to working with others. And then I described, that in my response to the question of what about when things look like they're hopeless? Working with others to reach this ultimate hope, very fulfilling. It's extremely fulfilling, even if you're not going to necessarily see the end. You see incremental bits of progress. I've been an activist in different ways. When you're in the trenches, you see good things that are happening. When you're on the sidelines, you really don't. When you're on the sidelines, you read the newspaper. And there's not a lot of good in the newspaper. In the trenches, there's a lot of good. So the key is to be involved. The narratives, the practices, the rituals, the prayers, the songs of Judaism are rich with hope. We need to, as Sarah said, change the perspective a little bit. And then, once you've taken hope seriously, once you have seen where you can find it and how you can strengthen it, as I said before, see yourself as a transmitter of hope. Expand your identity. You want to set an example for people in all kinds of ways of being honest, of being hardworking. Understand that people are looking to you to be an example of hope, be an example of the work to kind of bend this arc of the universe toward justice. It's not going to bend itself. We have to show people that we're involved in that bending. So change your identity a little bit, expand your identity to see yourself as a transmitter of hope.
Wow, what an inspiring and moving way to end.
Well,
Noah, thank you so much, Noah.
Sarah, thank you, Sarah. You're the best person to talk to.
You are it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed getting to know you and reading this book. It was just really a delight.
Thank you. And thank everybody for being here and sharing this. See you on the front lines of the work that needs to be done.
And once again, you can buy both books. Links are in the chat. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Dad, for bringing this book and a lot more hope into the world and into our lives and our hearts.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.